Hello, WonderCon. Welcome to It's Live. We have such a talented lineup of people here to talk about their work, so let's jump right in. So let's start off with John. I have to start off with The Last of Us. I mean, the video game was already a fan favorite, but it has taken the world by storm with the series. What would you say was your approach to adapting the video game's iconic visuals to create real-life post-apocalyptic world for the television series?
Well, you know, there's a couple of layers to that. There is the fact that the game doesn't really exist, so we have to find everything in the game or make it. That's part of the design process. I actually approached Naughty Dog to look at where they were coming from when they developed the game. And it was interesting because not being a video game person, even though I played the game a bit, they're making paths and we're making environments. And our environments also need to be taken into consideration camera placement, actors, the script, all those layers and all that input has to be developed with the game in mind. And what I really loved about the game was the concept art. And because it looks like concept art we would make for a TV show, and we made our own concept art based on the concept art of the game. Some things in the game are iconic, and Neil and Craig really wanted them to be straight copies. But many episodes and many things, character development and stuff, is not in the game. So we took their concept art and pictures of natural disasters or something that's in the script as reference. Like if I was going to do a period picture, I'd look at Gainsborough paintings. So we use their concept art and references of natural disasters, water flooding, things like that to develop the look. But it was always going back to the concept art, their concept art, even though we generated our own because the script differentiates from it too.
Nice. Okay. So let's jump to Taylor for this next question. Dahmer, Monster Jeffrey Dahmer Story. Has anyone seen that just yet? a little scary. Now, this is based on real-life people and events. How did you balance the need to accurately depict the events with the demands of storytelling and dramatic pacing?
I mean, there's definitely a balancing act. This story's been told countless times, and even if you're not kind of aware of the horror surrounding the events, like Dahmer's name, just kind of because of the horrific crimes. So, the first question I asked myself is, why would you contribute to telling the story again? And I think this time around, the goal was to kind of expose the system that enabled Dahmer to get away with this, and really show the victims as human beings with lives and families that were taken too soon. And I knew it would be challenging to kind of have a protagonist, for lack of a better word, such as Dahmer. But I was definitely up for the challenge if it meant kind of exposing the things that we're still dealing with today. And the balancing act really was between the actual story, like what actually happened, and then carving out those moments to highlight the negligence of the police. The police in that town. Yeah. And so a lot of the times we just kind of had to flatten or hide the gratuitousness of it all, because we're all aware of that. We all know what happened. And so we weren't trying to highlight that, and really just kind of, really just try to highlight the most important aspect of this, which is what allowed this to happen in the first place.
Exactly. Nice. Now, there are many crucial scenes throughout Ms. Marvel, but one that really stands out is the partition scene in episode 5. Jules, what would you say was your approach to this pivotal moment from the cinematographer's perspective?
Well, the most important aspect of that scene is the historical nature of it. For South Asians, specifically Indians and Pakistanis, their families all have a partition story. It's a monumental kind of moment that happened in their history back in 1947. As many of you probably know, that the country was partitioned into India, East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So for the director, Shamin Abed Chinoy, who is Pakistani, it was really important that she was respectful to that moment in history. Much more so, that took precedent much more so than the technical and in a way the creative and even story, that she felt an enormous responsibility to tell that story and to tell it in the right way. Now you mix with that the elements of a Marvel comic book movie, and specifically Miss Marvel, and you have elements in there that may clash against that kind of historical, the importance of that historical moment. So that was the thing that drove my creative process, specifically working with Charmaine, was doing that story justice, and being respectful to that story. Because often you can, you can not be overwhelmed by the creative aspects or the story aspects of the actual character and her journey. But it was an unusual thing in my career to face a scene or a sequence like that, where we had to be super respectful to it. So that was the kind of driving force, and everything kind of flowed from there.
Awesome, good. Now, Stefan, we're going to jump over to you. As the composer for the animated film Batman: The Doom That Came to Gotham, which, by the way, comes out in 3 days, can you give us insight into your process into writing the score?
Batman was one of my favorite projects for the fact that it allowed me to create a different sound palette that normally you would not hear in the Batman series. I think this film kind of exploits a different side of the Batman universe. And I think what I normally do when I start with scoring projects is starting with a playlist of some sort to get me in the tone that I want. But with this project being so unique, it kind of forced me to listen to the old gurus of Batman. We have our Danny Elfman, Elliot Goldenthal, Shirley Walker, who doesn't get enough credit. Those were the sound that we were trying to capture, that old school Hollywood sound mixed with like a horror type of soundscape as well. So trying to marry both of those together was a little bit of a difficult task. But once we found that, the sound palette, it kind of wrote itself, to be honest. So, but yeah, like I said, I like to start with just listening to as much music that can kind of get me there, studying more about the Elseworlds lore, Lovecraftian tropes, which are very important to the film if you've seen it. And so, I just was really excited to be able to create new material for this iconic, person and character for this fantastic franchise. So,
Nice, awesome. Now, one major theme with the projects you've all have worked on is that they are adapted from already existing media. Christopher, from the producer's standpoint, what does the overall process of adapting video games to film and television look like? What would you say are some of the common challenges that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, so the process involves, first of all, sort of finding what project you're going to work on. In Hollywood, a lot of producers, including myself, are independent, so we find projects and we bring them to studios, and then they buy them, and then we go and make them for them. So it's picking one, finding something that's available, negotiating the rights, and then the creative process really starts to begin. And the first thing you have to figure out is, does this work better as a TV show or as a movie? And then if you're doing it as then you want to go and you have to find the writer, and you want to find somebody who really understands the material at a very deep level, preferably somebody who is a fan of the game beforehand. And then you start working on going through the process of developing, creating the script, and then getting ready and go. And there are challenges that exist from the very beginning all the way to the end, and especially with video games. And one of the things that comes up very often is that for a lot of video games, the main character is designed to be sort of a hollow shell. Like, there's a reason why Master Chief in Halo doesn't talk and why Link in Zelda doesn't talk, because you're supposed to essentially just project yourself onto that person. And so if you're adapting a game like that, then any choice that we as filmmakers make that isn't something that you would have picked kind of alienates you from that. So that is like a really, really inherent risk. And the other thing is that a lot of times games are, 40 to 100 hour experience. And even if you're doing a television show, if you have 10 hours to do that, between 2 to 10 hours, like, that's really hard too. So you have to figure out what are the elements that go into that. And then lastly, the big challenge, although this one I really enjoy doing a lot, is finding the way to both make the property and make the game accessible to a really wide audience of people who have never experienced it before, but also really make it resonate with the people who really love that game. And that's an interesting balancing act, and you really have to get it right. And it's tricky, but it's a really fun part of the job.
That's great. Elle León, right? Is that correct?
Nailed it.
Yes. So, as co-creator and writer of the comic series Mark of Death, how are you approaching adapting the material to television?
You know, I think one thing you see on this panel is everybody talks about respect. It really distills it down. How can you respect the source material? How can you build upon it? I think almost everybody in this room has probably at one point said, the book was way better. or the comic is way better, why did they do that? Or the video game was awesome, why did they ruin it? And I think for creators, and our challenge is really, what are we going to do with the source material, and how are we going to elevate it? How are we going to bring it to a new height? And that's by standing on the shoulders of the material itself. And so with Mark of Death, which is this crazy, violent, dark comedy about how everybody's given a set of time in the world, and this one man finds out he can't die. He goes on this vengeance struggle, basically, with serial killers that you can summon like Pokemon in a time-stealing world. It's absolute insanity. How do you elevate that beautiful, complex world that's depicted in the comic, which was brought to life by Stephen Gordon, who's downstairs, by the way. You should go to his booth. He did X-Men Evolutions. He did an Avengers movie. I mean, he was one of the rotos on Lord of the Rings, the early animation. Amazing, amazing body of work. But his art is so phenomenal. How do you translate that into the physical form? How do you elevate that narrative? And so one thing we did was look at what you can't translate in an image that doesn't move. So there's so many magical powers. There's freezing time. There's all these amazing things that this person can do at the tip of his fingers with a cell phone, and elevate those in a live action narrative. So showing that in basically a new space. And then the other is just elevating character arcs. How do you get people to dive into these characters and see that emotion that sometimes you'll get from a comic? You can feel that in a game. I mean, The Last of Us is a prime example of a game that I just cried the whole way through. And it's trying to be that next level with the characters and show their struggle. And when you read on a comic book page, sometimes you don't really grasp the struggle fully. Like, you can kind of get through a scene and be like, and now I'm going to avenge my wife. And then, of course, in TV, you can't do that. You can't have someone say that. You have to see their emotion. You have to see the completion of their arc. And so that it's grounded in a sense of reality, so you feel it. And that's what makes it accessible almost to everyone else. If you can make them feel that that character is not only a part of your world, but their emotional struggle is similar to your own, which is death. What do we do with our purpose? And that's where we really grounded the theme of the story and have translated the comic into something that visually is so opulent, but then also just from an emotional standpoint, anybody can get that access point into the show and say, what would I do if I could live forever? What would I do with that time? How would I use it? And I think that, more than anything, makes something way more enjoyable for a viewer, aside from all the dazzling magic and showy things that we can put around it. So with adaptation, kind of to distill that, is just honor the source material in a way that makes people go, wow, the show's actually way better than that comic. And then also try to be honest with the human experience in whatever you're adapting.
Nice. Yeah, if I could live forever, I'd probably be at Disneyland every day, so it sounds great for me.
Your chances now.
Exactly. So now, Taylor, we're going to jump back to you. For Dune, can you talk about your collaboration with the director Denis Villeneuve and the rest of the editing team to ensure that the final cut of the film stayed true to the novel and the vision?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and this might be a little biased, but Denny and the editor Joe Walker, to me, are nothing short of geniuses. So there wasn't much in the way of help that was needed, but they even still kind of created space for really healthy collaboration and really utilized the post team. I can at least speak for the post team as a resource, as a creative resource. I mean, there were times where we had trouble maybe bridging beats, like just getting from one scene to the next, and that kind of opened the floor to ideas, inspiration from the book, our personal lives even, just to kind of draft up, whatever came to mind to help them problem solve. And a lot of things were accepted, and there are a bunch of bits and pieces from the post team that are in Dune and Blade Runner and Sicario and Arrival. And so it's like, it's bigger than pushing buttons. It's like garnering trust from your team, enough for them to use you as a valuable resource. One of the best experiences I've had as an assistant editor was definitely on Dune.
Nice. That's awesome. Now we're going to move on to comic books for a second. I'd love to jump to Jules to speak on Miss Marvel a little bit more. How do you approach lighting and framing scenes to convey character emotions and themes? And can you give us an example to show where cinematography played a key role in telling the story?
Mm-hmm. So just a little bit of background. I shot eps 4 and 5 of Miss Marvel, and we shot those in Thailand. The other eps were shot in Atlanta. And the reason why we went to Thailand was that we needed real locations. In those episodes, Kamala goes, or episode 4, she goes back to Karachi to visit her extended family. And then in episode 5, we flash back to the partition in India in 1947. So we really needed real locations, and it was a time during COVID as well. We were doing very large crowd scenes, specifically the one in partition. So, and Thailand proved to be at that time a really good place to shoot because of the way they were handling the COVID situation. But funnily enough, for Miss Marvel, it was creatively, it was very important for us to ground the show in reality. There was a real resistance to shooting scenes or creating like a virtual world. Everything was shot either on stage, on real sets, or on real locations. And there was one scene in particular where in episode 4, Kamala is in Karachi, and she goes up to the rooftop of her grandmother's house. And we play out this scene with Kamala and her grandmother, and it was written to take place at the end of the day. And Charmaine, the director, and I really wanted it to be nostalgic and to have a kind of a romantic kind of feel to it. And so that was a scene that would have been extremely difficult to shoot on location. In Bangkok, we needed a background that did look like Karachi. But the most important thing was just light. And we shot that scene over about 5 or 6 hours. And it would have been really hard to pull that off. Certainly in one day, we would have needed a few days to shoot that magic hour. And then you're not guaranteed weather conditions, especially in Bangkok. At the beginning of monsoon, it rained all the time.
Oh,
so that was a scene that I pushed from the get-go to be shot on stage against green screen, and we would create a virtual background. And there was resistance to that because of that idea of it's got to be real and it's got to be grounded. And Charmaine and I really fought for that scene to be shot on stage and for the background to be done digitally. Now on a big production, if you had the facilities, that's a perfect kind of scene to shoot on a volume stage. But of course we didn't have that in Thailand. So that's a scene that's it kind of deviated from from the methodology of the shoot for Miss Marvel. And sometimes you've got to fight for particular things, and you've got to fight hard to tell the story in the way that you want to tell it.
Yeah, nice. So Stefan, with Batman being such a well-known franchise, I'm sure we all know Batman in here, how did you make sure to bring something new and fresh to the score while also staying true to the character of Batman and the story in this adaptation?
That is a difficult question to answer. I think for Batman being so signature, of what it is, everyone really knows his themes, and so I wanted to completely cut that out and create a score that did not reference any material from before, because this film is unlike any of the others. So it's about, I think, 90 minutes long, and it features an hour and 27 minutes of music that was all programmed and performed by myself.
Wow.
And
nice.
Thank you. So, due to, time constraints, we had to work fast on this project. And my amazing team, I couldn't have done it without them. But developing this new material, overall, I just wanted to make sure that the score remained as relentless as the film. If you've seen it, you'll totally understand. And also, there were some uses of different, obviously, a major Batman theme, and major and minor signifying changes within what's going on screen, but also the use of the Dies Irae motive, which is the Day of Wrath, if you will, a very common plain chant motive that is used a lot in classical music to signify evil, and just using that to manipulate it to take us into a different realm. So yeah, what you will hear is an hour and 27 minutes of full blast orchestra, all played by me. But I think overall, I think it marries very well with the film. I think it gives us that signature dark sound. It exploits quirky sounds that you aren't used to hearing in a series or in a film like this. So yeah, and if you're interested in hearing the score, there will be a soundtrack release. I will have that date on my socials. So you can follow me on IG or Twitter at Viola Nation, Viola Nation, and stay tuned for that.
Bravo.
Nice. All right, so Elle León, Surrender Your Sons is another book to series adaptation you're working on. What does your role of executive producer look like for this project and adaptations in general?
So obviously everybody up here knows collaboration. That's basically a huge part of our job. We couldn't do it without every single person. So one of that is, first is Mark of Death was working with my co-creator and writer Andrew Pensner, who we've done a lot of projects together. And in that journey, you learn about how basically to break story with a whole group of individuals. So for Surrender Your Sons, this is a YA novel by Adam Sass. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's amazing. It's a thriller about gay conversion therapy. And they approached me to executive produce and co-showrun the project with director Rodrigo Bellot because for the last decade, I've worked with survivors of institutionalized abuse and basically talking about the troubled teen industry, which is an industry that has wreaked havoc on a lot of families and has led a lot of children to their deaths by suicide, and also just post-traumatic stress disorder. And these are children who think they're getting help and families that think they're getting help, but really put their children into cult-like institutions. And so this book it's an amazing read. It's fiction, but it's very much inspired by the real world. And so my job as a co-creator and executive producer is distilling this story and bringing truth to it the same way we would with Mark of Death. Although they seem like incredibly different stories, it's truth that you're searching for in these stories, which is how do you adapt something that is so harrowing, and that's by bringing your personal experience to it. So with Surrender Your Sons, it was near and dear to my heart as a member of the queer community, but also because I've had many friends who I've lost to suicide due to a lot of these programs. And so those are the projects that I think as creators you're attracted to. One, which is like projects that are so fun that you can't say no to, and then projects that you have to make because that's why you're here, right? And so it is an incredibly exciting show. I was adapting that was basically just taking page by page from the book and turning and this is going to surprise everybody, into a very dark comedy. Because what is the antidote to pain is humor and joy, and that's actually for a lot of queer individuals how we stay alive. So you're able to inject this kind of Fleabag twist into a conversion therapy thriller. So it's going to be wild and very exciting, but built on a very intense emotional foundation of empathy, and hopefully it starts a conversation in the real world about what these things, what these programs do to children and their families. So,
Nice. Sounds good. Well, I'm looking forward to when that comes out. Now, moving back to The Last of Us, John, how did you balance staying faithful to the video games world? I mean, there are so many incredible details in the game that fans were excited to see in the show, like the birthday card that Sarah made for Joel, for example, a little green dinosaur.
Well, that, their props department is just, we had an incredible props department that just made everything exact down to Ellie's bed sheets. They dyed them to match the game because, again, in the game, it's just made in a computer, and we have to make everything real and multiples. One of the things when I first met with Craig, like we have these source things, we have these things that all the Game Boys and girls know. What do we do with them? Yes, we have to make them. We're going to make them realistic. Sometimes we're making them, when we are in the phase of the world where civilization has stopped and for 20 years and you can't go to Kmart and get those bed sheets. How do we show that? And how do we show the evolution of that birthday card, which I believe comes up somehow, somewhere, and other things? So when I met with Craig, I showed him these pictures of this incredible photographer who went around the back alleys of Singapore and took pictures of chairs outside of restaurants, the classic broken down chair where someone comes out and has a cigarette. And then, when the chair back breaks, they just take a traffic cone and they gaffer tape it to the back of the chair. And then when the leg breaks, they just find a piece of wood. So we looked at these things and we were like, here is something. I wouldn't call it a shortcut, but it's not exactly a metaphor. I don't know what to call it. It's a patina that we're going to add to everything in the game. And even, when we see Ellie's backpack, in the game, it's the little doodad on the chain. It's pretty new. But in ours, if you look closely, it's cut in half and re-glued. So that's how we enhance it and take the source material, but make it more true to what the scripts are saying and what the individual directors who come in, and I won't take credit for that idea, that's someone else's, but that's how we, the process of all the collaborators coming in and adding everything from the DP, this is the props idea, I don't know, the director, the script, the weather would influence things as well. So all of those things are just kind of in a mix, and it would take me an hour to go through, I would love to just sit and go, okay, for the stables, this is how that thing happened. And this is how that, there's 98 sets, there's 180 locations. Wow. So, we could go on and on, but that's just an example of, adding a patina and a specific to the show that couldn't be done in the game, and it wasn't the focus of the game.
Nice, yeah. So speaking of Easter eggs, have any of you planted any Easter eggs in some of the projects that you guys have worked on that you could maybe share with us? Any Easter eggs that we may know? Go ahead.
Mark of Death has a lot to do with time. So when the comic book is in your hands, you can start scanning the pages, and there's lots of characters with tattoos and subtleties with time references of how much time they have left. So keep a lookout. Dig.
I would just say, without giving away too many spoilers, a lot of characters that you may be familiar with in the DC universe appear in this film, and the Batman the Doom that came to Gotham. So you may see them in an unconventional way, and I'll just say that.
Ooh. I'm not sure whether this is.
No, go
Sorry,
for it.
Taylor, yeah. I'm not sure whether this is an Easter egg, but our director Charmaine on Miss Marvel is very involved in social issues in Pakistan, and specifically women's rights, social rights. She comes from a documentary background. And the scene where Kamala turns up at the airport, she arrives at the airport in Karachi, that classic thing where people are holding name cards of those who are arriving, family members or people they've got to pick up. A lot of those names are the names of political prisoners that Charmaine wanted to put in there and make a statement, so which I thought was pretty cool.
Nice. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel kind of silly with this Easter egg after that, but I try to put a little bit of myself selfishly in each film. And we were sitting on Blade Runner 2049. I was in a room close to the VFX department and made friends, and they kind of added my name to one of the deceased replicants in one of the spinners towards the beginning of the movie, and that's it. I could die happy. Yeah.
If you go frame by frame, you'll see
Right.
her face for 1 second.
Exactly. Worth it.
It's your cameo. Now, I know you all lead busy lives and are working on new projects, so we have to know what you guys are working on next. I mean, if you can say so, of course. Christopher, let's start with you, as I've heard that the board game Terraforming Mars will be getting a screen adaptation by your production company, Cobalt Knight. What has that development process looked like so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because board games don't often get screen adaptations, and it presents some similar but very different challenges from adapting video games or anything else, really. And one of the biggest ones in general is most board games don't have a narrative to them. So you have to figure out what that's going to be. And on the plus side, something like Terraforming Mars is such a rich and wide world that there are a lot of things that we can pull from and where we can choose to go with it. But then on the flip side, it also, Terraforming Mars specifically, takes place over generations. So how do we capture that and distill that down into something that you can work with? But there are so many interesting narrative threads that we can pull on. So if you aren't familiar with Terraforming Mars, it takes place sort of at the time where big corporations start to come to Mars. So, for example, there are all these different corporations that you can choose from, like one's a mining company, one's a tech company, one is a PR company. And you can sort of imagine, even though there aren't a lot of characters, which is yet another challenge, you can imagine the type of person who might choose to run a mining company and who that might be and who might decide to go and work for a mining company. And alternately, you can figure out like who may have taken a job at the mining company, but that really isn't for them, and they're trying to figure out how to get out of that situation. And then also, like, when corporations show up, like, big corporations are never the first people to show up. They need a proof that this is going to be worth their time and investment. So that means that there are people who have been living on Mars for a long time, and probably there is an entire generation of native Martians who are there who really know how this works, and a lot better than the people who are coming in. And there you start to see the conflict. You start to see the narratives. Because the way that this adaptation is going to work is if we tell a story that is relatable to people who aren't living on Mars. But that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, not just with this project, but with every project that we do, that like what we love about genre projects is they allow us to tell hard stories that may feel too heavy if they were just set in contemporary time and place. And so we think about it of how can we take this fantastic environment and use it to really expose really cool characters and really interesting situations that we may not otherwise just have a tough time talking about.
Nice. I mean, does anyone else have any other projects that they can share, just like Christopher did, or where we can see the projects that you guys are working on right now? This question's open to anyone.
We have a series that we've been developing for quite some time called Qatari and the Last Gods. It's an animated series that basically is a retelling of the Spanish colonization of the Andean Plateau, as if the gods and spirits of the indigenous people are alive and real. And so think of it as kind of like Attack on Titan meets Princess Mononoke. So, which is awesome. But that is just at its tail end now. And then we're going to be taking that out. So we're very excited for that.
Nice, awesome.
I've just started shooting The Old Man season 2. If any of you know about The Old Man, it's Jeff Bridges, John Lithgow TV series. And season 1, we shot half the series in LA, and then the second half of the series we were due to go to Morocco because we had flashbacks to the early to mid 80s during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and Morocco was the perfect place to shoot, given their experience with film and also just the desert locations. But on March Friday the 13th. 2020, we were shut down with a lot of other major productions around the world because of COVID. We were due to fly to Morocco 2 days later. When we came back in October, they had decided Morocco was off the menu, and we had to go to Santa Clarita, which is north of LA, as you probably all know, and shoot in the deserts there. And it actually turned out amazingly well. The VFX work done on the mountain range of the Hindu Kush, which is in Afghanistan, was fantastic. But anyway, we started shooting just a week ago, and season 2 starts out modern day with our 2 heroes in Afghanistan. And we head up to Santa Clarita, and of course, it doesn't look like a desert. With all the rain you guys have had, it looks like Ireland. So we should be shooting Far and Away too with Nicole and Tom Cruise, rather than The Old Man. So anyway, there's a little bit of color grading to be done at the end of this season, I think.
All right, now in one short sentence or less, it's kind of hard, I know. What advice would you guys give to people wanting to do what you do or trying to break the industry? We can start going down the line if we'd like.
With me?
Yeah. He's like, I need to think more. Or anyone can start if they like.
Just one sentence?
Or less.
Okay.
You can do more.
Or two.
Learn how to collaborate with your fellow people. When you come from an art background, you get very precious about your work. The hardest thing to do is to learn how to collaborate with your creative partners, especially the DP. The DP and the production designer need to be best buddies, and everything will be great. If you have the DP, costume designer, and the production designer working together, that's my advice.
That's good.
Amen to that.
As a cinematographer, don't obsess about the technical. Concentrate on the depth of feeling rather than the depth of field, is my advice.
That's good, Jules.
That's good.
That's a good one.
For editors, I would say get comfortable being vulnerable. Don't be afraid to show your work to any and everybody, because you'll learn faster with feedback. You'll learn faster with having folks just in the room with you while you watch your work. It's a really scary thing to do, especially when you're starting out, but you'll get used to it and it'll make you so much better. Be vulnerable in a nutshell.
This one's a 2-parter, but if I talk fast, it's 1 sentence. Find out who you are and what you are uniquely, and don't try to copy what other people are doing. Just find the core of what you have to offer, because you have a series and an idea that nobody else has. You do. And focus on that first and cultivating who you are, and then building that. And then after you've built something, find people who are so crazy about it. Like there's an IP rush in this industry, right, where everybody's like, oh my gosh, it's a thing. Well, it exists. Let's make it into something. And everybody's hungry. And so when you're new, you're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Everybody wants my stuff. But then you realize there's big names, and sometimes big names aren't the best collaborators. Sometimes the people who show the least excitement but have all the gold aren't the best people to be working with. Find the people who make you feel alive and want to deliver the best thing you can. And it's a hard lesson to learn when you're in it, but once you've learned it, then passion follows passion, and they'll care more than anybody else. So.
Man, that was awesome. I would say be a team, as a composer, be a team player and separate yourself from your ego and what the production needs. Also, network in traditional and non-traditional ways. And the more people you know, the more opportunities that come your way, and build your team now. Don't wait until you're in a major project to build a team. There's a lot of people that come at play. My assistants, Krista Dugan and Jamie Jimin Park, helped me tremendously in this score. So it's not a one-person show when it comes to the composer. Have your team, and yeah.
And for me, I think the biggest opportunity, or the biggest bit of advice I could give, is be open to opportunities, and especially ones that don't seem obvious at first, because you never know where things are going to go. I didn't think when I was young that I was going to work in video games, and I just happened to be. It's luck meets preparedness is so much of the game. So, follow some crazy ideas when you have the opportunity and pull that thread and see where it goes, because it may lead you someplace really amazing.
All right, well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you to our panelists, John, Jules, Taylor, Elle León, Stefan, and Christopher, for being here to discuss their work with us. And thank you to Impact 24 and WonderCon for putting this panel on.